the other day. It was right after you had said that, so I was like, oh, that's weird. I can find it, but she's like, I won't come.
She had sent prior, not as this week.
All right, we're calling this meeting to order for budget at, oh, I'm not sitting next to you. 8:02. AM, yes.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first school committee budget workshop of getting ready for the 2023-2024 budget. We're doing things a little bit differently this year. In the past, we've held our budget workshops usually on Mondays and Wednesdays, starting in the end of January, starting about this time of year. All of that is because we try to work backwards. Our goal is to make sure we have an approved school budget by our end of February, our February 27th meeting, so that we can be able to pass that on to the City Council for further deliberation at that time. So what we've tried to do is change things up a little bit differently this year to have a Saturday meeting. And what we're looking to do is take all of today, our goal is to take our budget, this big budget right here, and kind of break that down by article. What we've done is instead of having this meeting go through the budget line by line, what we've done is kind of boiled that down and brought that down to some executive summaries for each article. We're still going to go through each one of the 11 articles today, but what we're going to do is kind of give you an executive summary so you'll be able to see where the changes are in that particular article. What we'd like to do is also try to talk about any questions that you have today. It may be one of those things that the item that we're discussing might have to be something that we move to what we call a revisit list, so that that can be something else that we can come back to be able to talk to. Because this is, the whole budget process is complex, and so oftentimes we do our best to try to give you an overview and break that down, so it may make sense to take things and say, that's something we want to put to the side because we may want to come back and talk about that later once we kind of see everything in its proper context. I'll leave to the chair to also know that we might want to take breaks as we get going through this to use the bathroom. Also, thank you to everyone who brought a lot of munchies and food to help us get through this. So without doing this, we're not exactly sure how long it'll take. Our hope is after we get through today and all the different articles, that will help us set up what our future budget workshops might have to be able to focus on. Our next budget workshop after today is next Wednesday on January 25th. And on that day, we're really going to focus on revenue. That's really going to be looking at the our state subsidy. We've got a presentation planned for you to be able to kind of show that piece of it. Today, we really focus on what our budget is and what the expenses are. So Beth, if you want to put us up to what got us to today, there you go, excellent. Just to let people know, both our school committee, but also those who are going to be watching, and these budget workshops are going to be recorded. We're going to put them on our website for people to be able to access. We're also going to have the materials that we have also available for people who may want to access them. Budgeting is not just something that we roll out of bed one day and just say, hey, let's put a budget together. All budgets are challenging as we try to meet the needs of our school department, the varied needs to support our students, but we also have to balance that with what burden that is going to place on our citizens and on our taxpayers. And so this is something that a lot of work goes into this budget. We start this process in the fall. It feels funny that we're already starting to look at a budget for the following year when we really haven't even got into this particular school year. But that's the process that works. We had all of our directors and our principals responsible for their budgets. They had to submit their budgets to our business administrator, Cheryl Fournier, on December 5th. And so as the directions that we gave our principals and our directors were build the budget that you need to be able to do the work that we have to do. That being said, we were aware that expenses have gone up. That was something I think we were all cognizant of. And I'll get to it later, but we also are expecting less state subsidy. And so those are not great factors when expenses are up and revenue is down. So that's something that I think was in the back of our minds of our principals. So they were very conscious about that, conscientious in terms of the budgets that they presented to us. Cheryl, when she gets that budget December 5th, she uses the month of December to go through that budget line by line, and a lot of what Cheryl would do is a lot of checking just to make sure that there wasn't anything that's missed. She sets up individual meetings with all the principals and directors to go through that budget, really from the idea of putting an eye on, is there anything that was missed, kind of double and triple checking to make sure what we have. Then Cheryl will put that together, and in January, in the new year, we set up individual meetings with each principal and each director. For Cheryl, Assistant Superintendent Steve Bouchier, and myself, we meet with each principal and we meet with each director, and we go through their budgets line by line. A big focus on what we're looking at is changes to say, is there anything to make sure that they have to defend what they already have, but there also may be some requests or some other things that are in there that they also have to defend. What you're going to see primarily is that's what's going to have in front of you today. There were a few slight changes that we'd be able to make to adjust that, but a lot of that is today on January 21st is our starting point. As you know, people who've been through this process, where we start on January 21st is not where we're going to end up on February 27th. But our hope is that we're going to be able to look at all the different pieces and get questions answered, get the information that we need so that we can be able to do our best to put the best budget forward on February 27th. Any questions on that before we get started? We do have a couple new members, Kelly and Melissa. This is probably going to come at you fast and furious. It is a little bit confusing. Our hope is that we're going to be able to break things down the best that we can, and you're going to see it kind of come together as you look at that. We have, instead of giving everyone this huge budget book that goes through everything line by line, what we've done is kind of broken it down in terms of your own budget book for that. And we've also given you a copy of what we're going to go over today with the executive summaries and the different slides to be able to do that for that. Cheryl, anything that you want to add on that process? No. One thing that's important to realize when we talk about a school budget is we are a people organization. So when you look at what constitutes and what makes up our budget, we are primarily people. We are primarily staffing. And so in that sense, you're going to have those costs that we call them turn the page costs. And so I think we always want to use this as a starting point where we have our 2022-2023 budget. If we were just going to be rolling that over to 2023, 2024, with what was already in that budget, our current budget, just to roll that over with the new cost, you're going to see that being increased almost by $3 million. $2,946,588. That's just under a 5% increase, just to turn the page. Getting back to what I was talking about with people, being that if you're just looking at salary and benefits, we're not talking about any other those other costs, but just salary and benefits itself, right now is at a 3.8% increase to turn the page. So that's $2,207,047. Okay, so I think that's the challenge that we have is our costs just staying the same are already going to be going up. We're going to do our best to try to break down those costs for you. There's also going to be some other additional things in this budget. How it gets broken down is we have, our budget is broken down by articles, and there's 11 articles, and that helps us also in terms of what we get back for state subsidy to be able to do that. So the next slide here is you're going to see just an overview of where we are in terms of each individual article. You can see there that we have the actuals that we have for 2019-20, what the actuals were for 2020-2021, and then the revised actuals for 21-22. Then you see our revised budget for 2022-2023, which is our current. And then you're going to see the 2023-2024 proposed budget. And then we've got a column there for the variance between our current budget and the one that we're proposing and what that overall change is going to be. A reminder, today we are focusing on primarily the expenses for that. Now, to build that budget, there were some assumptions that were made. I'm going to let Cheryl talk about those assumptions that we have built into this budget.
So some of the assumptions that we created is salaries are based on either the union contract or 3%, depending on if we have a contract that's outstanding or not. Teachers' main PERS, which is their retirement fund, is going from 3.84% to 4.47%, which is about a $138,000 increase to our budget. Health insurance, which we'll know more about next Wednesday when we talk to Shelley, is currently in the budget as a 9% increase, which is $656,000 increase to our budget. And then I kind of just put this nuance here that because this is one of the big factors that happen as we go. For every 1% when we renew, every 1% up or down, it's a change of $72,875. So if it comes in at 8%, we'll have a $72,875% savings. So that's kind of why I put that there, because that's a fairly decent sized number.
And just talking about that, if you look at last year's budget that we proposed on day one, it did have a 9% increase in there for health insurance.
Last year it was 8%.
8%, okay? So last year we had an 8% increase when we started. When we ended and when we got our renewal percentages, that was down to a 0% increase, okay? So that was able at that time for us to be able to subtract that 8% increase in the budget, and you can see the impact that that has. Health insurance is a big part of our budget. I mentioned salary and benefits. That's the benefit portion that we were talking about as a cost to the Sanford School Department. We've realized the impact that health insurance has had on our budgets over the years. We've been very fortunate in the last 2 years that we were at a point where we had 0% increase, and that's obviously that's very helpful for us when it comes to preparing that budget. Health insurance is such a big piece that next Wednesday, we do this from time to time. There's a workshop that we're going to have put on. We thought that would be nice with Melissa and Kelly new, but also all of our school committee members, I think, can benefit from getting a better understanding of health insurance. We're partners in that with our employees, and so we've got the Sanford Federation of Teachers are also going to be part of that workshop as well. And Shelley can come in to kind of explain that because it goes into much deeper. One of the concerns we have, because I know Kelly, when we asked her what her projections are to put in this budget, she said 9%. And that, as you can see, is a big number. And so I was talking to Shelley, our representative, say, whoa, help me understand this, because I know as a district, we've done pretty well. What Shelley is worried about, and she'll tell us more about this next Wednesday, is she's worried about high claims. There's just a small number of high claims can really drive this one way or the other. And that's why as she's looking at how we've done in the past year, she sees that there's the high claims that we're talking about, those have increased. So even overall, we may be doing better. Those high claims are what drive things. And she's going to talk things more about that next Wednesday. But just where we sit today, our budget has increased $656,872 based on that health insurance number that we have.
To kind of put it a little bit in perspective, our total budget for just health insurance is right around $9 million. So it's a large number for us. Okay, so other items that are our assumptions, additional safety items that we've added over the course of this budget for based on some of the events that have happened in the past.
And I'll jump in there. That obviously, sorry,
No.
I can't help myself. We obviously, safety's been a priority for us. That's been something that we identified as an ongoing area that we always have to make sure that we're staying on top of. We started that work, doing that last summer. Then as we went through with the work, as everyone is probably aware, we had the incident November 15th at Sanford High School, Sanford Regional Technical Center. And so with that, that's also had us be able to use that event to look at all of our procedures, look at all of our equipment. And so you're going to see that in this budget are also going to be upgrades. We've been able to we've been all along been doing some of those upgrades and also doing them even this year. But we're also looking at it that you're probably going to see some things in there that we've moved those up on timelines forward, that you're going to see some increases in that budget that are safety related.
Other items that we've added, 10 new positions or 10 positions moving from ESSER and grants that we're bringing into the local budget this year. We'll talk about those more as we go through the articles because they're all noted in each article. And then we have 3 new coaching positions that we'll also talk about in more depth when we get to the athletics article. 4.2, and I put a .2 because I didn't know how to describe one of them, for new staffing positions, and we'll go over those also when we go through the executive summary, and 1 additional SRO.
And so a couple things just to mention that. Cheryl's right. We're going to dig into those a lot deeper to talk about anytime we're looking at new positions and the impact that they're on the budget. Those are coming from different areas right now. They may be coming from grants that we have right now that are expiring. That right now, the need, even though we knew that, the need is so great that it's justified that we feel that that's something that has to be considered moving into the local budget. And then when you look at coaching positions, we've also had over time, as we've looked at ways to expand the athletic program and offerings that we have, those have been done where we've kind of broken that up so that instead of doing it all in one year, we've kind of done that in a phase-in approach. And so what we do is this part of this year is there are some middle school coaching positions that we're looking to expand with this one. There are some new staffing positions, and then we also have a change in that the school resource officer. So we will go into that as well, that's going to be something with some changes in that area for us to maintain and to have an additional SRO. And so we'll be able to talk about that more as we go into it. I mentioned today we're talking about expenses. I do want to talk about the revenue a little bit, okay? Revenue, that's something that we are going to get our EPS subsidy revenue, our preliminary. We were hoping to have that this week. We don't. In talking with the Maine Department of Education, they are scheduled to release those preliminary figures next Wednesday. And that's going to cut it close for us because we're going to be going over revenue and that EPS formula on Wednesday. I think what you'll see is Cheryl has put together a really nice presentation that really breaks that down to show what that'll be. I want to talk about revenue real quickly just to help you get your arms around the fact that based on our information, we are expecting to receive less state subsidy. And in some ways, it could be significant. And what I mean by that is we do have our enrollment is increasing. Not by a ton, but it is increasing. And so having more students helps you when it comes going through that essential programs and services model. That helps. What also is going against us, though, are a couple other things. One, our valuation in Sanford is increasing. Overall, that's a great thing. But when it comes to how it impacts our state subsidy, it's not. Okay? Right now, I think we are, the state will say anything over 5%, you have to, they expect if your evaluation has gone up over 5%, in their eyes, that means your taxpayers should be able to take on more of that burden. Well, we know that's not, it doesn't quite work that way. It's not simple in that way. So, but with our valuation going up, it is over what that state part, the state expectation is. So what that means is we're going to receive less because they think we should be able to pay more. Okay, so that state subsidy from a valuation part, we're going to get less. There's a couple other changes to the formula, the EPS formula. The state, after coming out of COVID, had made some changes, one-time changes, that we benefited from in Sanford. Just them changing the student-to-teacher ratios, for example, we were able to get more subsidy for that. Also, they put more money towards disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged students. And so we were able, by using that change, we were able to get more revenue. Those percentages are going back to what they were, and we anticipate having less economically disadvantaged students. As we look at that, we're going to have less than what went through the formula last year. So those are some things that have us concerned as we do some of our projections that we're going to be receiving less state revenue. So I tell you that in the back of your minds, just so that you can keep that, be aware of that. As I mentioned, this is all going to kind of come together. We're not going to make decisions today, but I think it's important for us to understand the expenses, then see what we have for revenue, and then be able to do our best from that standpoint. Okay? All right. So, any questions before we get going? All right. So let's. Are we ready, Cheryl, to jump into we'll do an overall one, I guess, executive summary, and then we'll jump right into our...
Actually, we're going to go to enrollment first, so Steve's going to take over for a second.
Good morning. So in your packet, if you move forward a couple of pages, you'll notice there's a fold-out.
This page?
Looks like that. That has the enrollment, the current enrollment as of October 17th. When the budget process started, the first thing we look at is what's our student enrollment going to look like next year. So at the top, you have the enrollment that was based on that October 17th information. And then the chart below, that is our projected enrollment for next year, the 2023-2024 school year. And in that enrollment, you'll see the total number of students in each school. So if we look at Carl Lam School, our enrollment is looking to be about the same. The one addition at Carl Lam School that we're proposing is to bring over another pre-K classroom into Carl Lam School. So that would make 2 pre-Ks at Carl Lam School. That was the one major change there. That second column is the SRTC pre-K program, and so we're looking to continue that with 16 students. If you look over at MCS, their enrollment is projected to increase just slightly, but we have the same number of teachers over at MCS. We did shift a teacher from a grade level, but the total number remains the same. If we look at SPE, enrollment at SPE is expected to increase by 12. Once again, the enrollment is going to increase a little bit. The number of teachers is going to remain the same. We're just shifting a grade level there. If we look at the middle school, now the middle school, the incoming 5th grade class is smaller than the outgoing 8th grade class. And so if you look at the enrollment next year at Sanford Middle School, it is projected to go from about 940 down to about 900, just under 900 at 899. At the middle school, we are proposing to eliminate 4 positions, 1 at each grade level with that. If you look at the high school this year we're at 1069. We're looking to increase our number at the high school by about 20 students. And at the high school, it's a little bit different when you look at the class sizes at the high school, just based on the course, the content. So you really can't, when it says the ratio is 18.5, you may have classrooms that have 24 students, and you may have classrooms that have 14 or 15. So just keep that in mind. But at the high school, we are also looking to eliminate 4 positions based on the ESSER funds. We're starting to decrease those ESSER funds, and so we're doing a gradual decrease in the number of staff that we have. So overall, our overall enrollment, we're looking to be up slightly with that next year. With that, so that's the enrollment.
And I'll talk around the ESSER funds now, because I think that you're going to be hearing about those. And I can see us at a future workshop really starting to focus in on those particular ESSER positions. But remember, after we were coming from out of COVID, we had the opportunity that we were able to get federal funding. We call those ESSER funds. It's another acronym that I can't think of the name right off the top of my head. But they're ESSER funds that we have 3 years to be able to spend those. Remember what our priorities were when we had that federal funding. At the time, we put a focus on getting our students back to school. Okay, if you remember at that time, we were on a hybrid model, or we were coming back where half our students were in person. So we wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to increase our staff to be able to get all of our students back. We were also knowing that there was some learning loss that had happened, so we put in a focus on educational recovery and putting things into position to help our students come back to be able to try to work to get caught up. And the other piece that was so important was the social emotional piece and the needs of our students and the increases that they had. So we'd really put those into the social emotional aspect of resources to be able to assist with those students. And we've put together a 3-year plan. And as Steve has mentioned, our goal is we are transitioning to be able to move back to where we were with the student-to-teacher ratios where we were prior to COVID. And so some of that is where you're seeing some of those positions and funding as we are starting to be able to move back. Now, we still have learning loss, we still have educational recovery, we still have social emotional learning needs. So that's the balance that we're trying to be able to move on that.
And the only other thing I want to mention about enrollment, we have, you look at the overall enrollment and you look at its increase slightly, but I think I want to mention that we are seeing some increased diversity in our community in regards to our ESOL population. And so later on in the budget and Monday night at the school committee, I'm going to share with you what those numbers look like. And so although the numbers we're going up just slightly, I think the need is increasing for some of our students in our community. So just to keep that in the back of your mind as we move forward.
And as school committee members, I think it was last week I shared with you information to show our change in enrollment just from what Steve said in October 17th to where we are at the beginning of January. Some people may look at that and say, hey, it just feels like we are getting an increase in students. Your own children may be coming home saying, yeah, we had a new person come to our class today with that. But what you'll see is we're also having a number of students also move out. So at the end of the day, at the beginning of January, our shift was, I think we were only up 4 students in terms of that. And a lot of that, I think, is probably to do with housing and the availability of housing. But I think that is the good news. We are increasing, okay? You're going to see some school districts throughout the state where their overall student enrollment is decreasing. And so that gets back to our revenue formula that I talked about from the state with our subsidy is the more students that we have going through that formula, the more revenue that we will receive.
I have a quick question. What is the, you said the ratios going back teacher to student, what is it going back to? Like, what are they kind of recommending on that, do you know? Like what, like you said it increased or decreased, so it was like 15 to 1. Is it back to 8? Do we know that number, the new ratio by any chance?
I don't know off the top of my head what the state ratio is. Cheryl may know exactly what is in the funding
Hold on.
formula.
I closed it out because we went off that subject, so hold on. So the ratios are, hold on.
While you're looking that up, just when I'm looking at this, the number of students that jump for next year from the middle school over to the high school, is the difference of that the Acton students? So in the middle school, there's just a jump when kids leave the middle school to go to high school. So I'm assuming it's Acton?
Yes,
It's significant among the students.
that's the number of students that come from Acton and St. Thomas. And so we combine those together. That's why you see the number is different in that 9th grade group.
So the state ratios are for kindergarten and pre-K is 15 to 1. Grade 1 through 5 is 16 to 1. For 6 through 8 is 17 to 1. And for high school is 16 to 1.
And as you can probably see, in essence, they use those to say, if you want to have more teachers than that, that's fine, that's your choice, but you need to pay for them, okay, in essence. And so that's why we pay attention to those student-teacher ratios, and you'll see that oftentimes we are higher. And, you know, I can know, speaking for our teachers who are working really hard, that can be challenging as the needs have come back to be able to see us do that gradual increase to back to where we were prior to COVID.
Okay, so executive summary.
So what we'd like to do now is we're going to give an overall changes for some district-wide, and then we're going to jump into executive summaries. We're going to try to break down all of those articles to help you get a better idea of saying, okay, what's changed in our budget.
So the district-wide ones we already went through, that was on that slide, one of the first slides, so I'm going to skip over that one, and we're going to go to Article 1.
Well, go back.
Oh, go back.
Yep, just a review, right? Because we're throwing a lot of information at you. That Maine state retirement, that's something that we're responsible for. And so by that percentage changing, that's going to be an increase of almost $140,000. The Maine state retirement for federal went from 18.73% to 19.5%. Now, we want to point this out, that that's not a cost to the general fund, but whenever we do pay for positions using that federal money, for example, coming out of ESSER or our title positions or IDA, when we do that, those increases, just going from 18.73 to 19.5%, there's where you get hit. Now, you can see, you'd be saying, wow, those percentages are not in your favor. Well, that's why we are trying to, at best that we can, move those positions over into the local side. But as we know, that's, you know, that also is also costly for that. Maine state retirement for the PLD percentage, that's staying the same. That is for people who are not eligible for the Maine State Retirement. And then we already talked about health insurance. We do have Harvard Pilgrim health insurance from the majority of our employees. We do have a couple of our small bargaining units. Our custodians and our administrators are part of the MEA Blue Cross plan. And so we mentioned with that, we've got in this budget a 9% increase with that, which is right now $655,872.
Yep.
So now what we're going to do is try to jump into the, start taking it individual articles by articles. We've broken that down with an executive summary to kind of show you in each one. And so we'll jump into Article 1. Cheryl, you want to take that?
So Article 1, which is regular instruction, so that's where all of our teachers, ed techs, and the general staff that teaches the kids. So it's anything that is a teacher, ed tech, that is not special ed. This is the regular education. So that has increased by 6.8%, or just under $1.2 million. And the reason is, so salary and benefits has increased by 7.2%, or just under 1.2 million. Of that increase, $404,000 is due to some positions we're moving into the local. So if you see the little grid down just below it, that is those positions. So there's the 3 ed techs for pre-K that were being paid by the pre-K expansion grant. Those 3 positions are coming into the local. We have the 2 new positions that we need for pre-K for the new classroom at CJL, which is a teacher and an ed tech for that. We'll go over that.
Yeah, I want to jump in and talk about that now, okay? So, as you know, in last year's budget, 2 major hallmarks of last year's budget were expanding our pre-K program and also expanding our bridge program. So there were we were able to do that last year to expand our pre-K program. There were grants that came from the state of Maine. That was a platform of Governor Mills, was expanding pre-K. We took advantage of that to be able to help us be able to cover the majority of those costs. We used that grant to help get our classrooms set up and started with that. There is a 16 to 1, 16 to 2. Yes. Well,
16 to 2 ratio.
16 to 2 ratio in every pre-K class. And so last year, we were able to sustain the majority of that increase. This year, we are going to have some added costs to this budget. They're primarily in the areas of ed techs for the salary and benefits. We do receive state subsidy for our pre-K students. And so as we look at that revenue, that subsidy that comes in, there is going to be less revenue than coming from students than what our expenses are for that. And so what you'll be seeing is, for that, is those are the pre-K ed techs that we're going to be looking at. That's a big change that we are going to be an add to this budget, okay? Now, you also look up there and you see that there is a pre-K teacher and one new pre-K ed tech. Steve, do you want to talk about that so people can get an understanding of what our plans are for the pre-K?
So traditionally, we have had a relationship with Head Start, where Head Start has provided services for, at one time it was 32 students. This past year, we took one of those programs over because Head Start was not able to find a teacher, and that teacher went over to Pride Elementary School. Moving forward in next year's budget, we have one remaining classroom over at Head Start, and what we are looking to do is to bring that program over to our public school, over to CJL. So with that, that means that the teacher in that ed tech position, that position will now come over to our local budget, but we will not be paying Head Start what we've been paying them to cover that program. So when you look at that figure of, for the teacher in the ed tech, we'll have revenue that comes back into our budget that will cover some of that cost. However, that will not cover all of the cost with that. So that's why we see that additional expense there. So there will be some revenue to offset that.
So for those just to give people a little of the historical view of Sanford, I think it was 6-7 years ago, we did participate in a state grant to help expand our pre-K program. But that grant was not what it was cracked up to be. It did come and hit a significant cost to the school department. We changed that model, and we went and developed our partnership with York County Community Action and Head Start, a wonderful partnership that has worked out. And so we've been able to work with them, and we contract with them. We collect the subsidy. We contract with them, and we collect the subsidy. That has always been a benefit to Sanford. That has always been, we've been able to get the quality programming, but we've also had it to be revenue for us in that change. Well, as Steve mentioned, over time, as factors have changed, they're having a hard time getting teachers. With that, as you can see, the move of moving pre-K into the public education. And so that's for us being able to make that move this year to bring that remaining Head Start. That would come over to Carl J. Lamb. So we're still going to have, now we'll have 2 pre-K classrooms at our 3 elementary schools, and we'll also have the program, continue to have the program at SRTC that we have. So you're not going to see an increase in students, okay? It's more about us kind of changing how it's coming back, coming under our domain, and with that, you're going to see there is going to be an impact to the budget.
And the reason for that is, as we look at the arrangement that we have with Head Start, coming at it from the standpoint of equity, really providing those students with connection to their neighborhood school, providing them with the same services. So it's really about equity. In addition, also looking in our community to really, what are we doing for our birth to age 3-year-old population? And with us taking on the 4-year-olds, Head Start is looking to provide services for the younger kiddos there. So that's really the reason for the shift. It's really about an equity, from an equity standpoint, and doing what's right for those kids. So.
We've been giving, Steve's been doing a wonderful job. We've been giving periodic updates of pre-K and how that transition's going. And I think we all knew the benefits of pre-K because it's the benefits that we have obviously for those students educationally and socially and developmentally. Also the benefits it has for our families to be able to do that, to get quality pre-K programming without having a cost or being able to pay for that. So there's a lot of wins for us to be able to do that. I know for us, there was some concern for us to say, hey, with everything coming on, we've got going on, do we really want to take on pre-K right now? And I have to take a moment to sing the praises of of Steve and our teachers and our ed techs and our principals and our administrators in our schools. They have welcomed those students, and we are really excited because you're now starting to see those benefits. We're going to see 96 kids who right now are going to be transitioning next year for pre-K into kindergarten, and that transition is going to be much, much smoother because of the interventions and the work that we've done already.
And really, the goal of pre-K is for students to walk into kindergarten being able to do school. So be able to regulate their emotions, being able to participate in small group, whole group, being able to transition. So that's really the goal of pre-K. And we're going to see the payoffs, as Matt mentioned, with what's going on there.
You're going to see another position that we're going to be moving over from a grant, and that is an ESOL teacher, okay? And,
Just to go back to pre-K. Love pre-K, but just to talk about the numbers. The state funding that we knew last year, which is for 1 year, there has been no
knowing how expensive it is for the cities. That's question number one. Do you want me to go to the next one, just in case you can double it? And then the second one, just so I'm clear, the cost without state funding, not knowing if we're going to get additional state funding, is between the MCS, CJL, Pride, well, I guess all of just the pre-K needs. My math is saying 260,965. Then you're adding the startup cost from Head Start, which is 22,000. So we're at 282,965, right? And so when we go to the bottom, I'm a little confused in the sense of like, is there an additional increase on top of the staff, the startup for the classroom? Is there an additional 48,000?
No, the 48,000 is just for that one new classroom. So it's the net change for that one new classroom. So that's the new ed tech and the new teacher, less the Head Start savings, plus the startup costs. It's a $48,000 expense for that one new classroom.
Okay.
And I think when you look at grant potential, I think there may be potentially grant opportunities to help us continue our pre-K expansion. Nothing has come out yet from the DOE. There is potential that could potentially when we look at that 48,267, there's potential to find funds to cover that. When you look at the salaries for the ed techs, I think when you take off the revenue that we're not going to be paying to Head Start, I think it's going to be around 160,000. That's really what the cost is for new staffing for those ed tech positions. Once you take that revenue off, that's what it's basically going to come down to. It's going to be roughly about 160.
So Amy, very good question about, is there any additional resources coming? Okay, because I think Steve is getting tired of me, because you'll see that the Department of Education will continue to always be pressing this to say, we have funds for pre-K. And our understanding is they have not been able to expend all of those. People have not signed up, so there's extra money. So Steve's tired of me continuing to pester the DOE to say, we want that money. If no one else is going to take it, we want that money because we're moving. So, but that being said, right now, there's nothing that we're hearing about that, but I see some signals out there that there may be some funds available, and if so, you can be assured that we're going to do everything that we can to be able to do that. Remember, some of these startup funds really are one-time costs for us to get that classroom going. The other things about the staff, the ed tech and the teacher, and the yearly supplies are going to be annual costs that we have to absorb. Okay.
ESOL.
Yes, back to ESOL. Right now, we also have a situation where, as Steve mentioned earlier, we're becoming more diverse in Sanford, okay? And what's with that is we have typically been adding that into our budget. We had a situation where a lot of this comes right down to compliance, okay? So as we start to increase students, last year we did see an increase in our ESOL students. We were able to take advantage of a one-time grant for us to be able to do that for this current year. Okay, if you remember looking around statewide, you saw other parts of the state, especially in southern Maine, some of those communities were just really hit really hard to come back and say, whoa, we weren't planning for this. We didn't have the levels that some of the other communities did, but we did have increases that got us out of compliance. So we did apply for that grant. We were able to get that, and that's been for this current 2022-2023 school year. With those funds going away and our population going back, you're going to be able to see that we have, in this budget, have an addition. That teacher that we have on the grant position is now coming into the local.
Yeah, I think when we look at our ESOL population, one thing we're noticing is we're having an increase of non-English speakers coming into our school system, and non-English speakers at all levels. So currently, I'll just use the high school for an example. Currently at the high school, we have 4 non-English speakers that need intensive services. And so that's why this additional position is needed to service those kiddos.
And just-
We're providing services now, but that increase it's continuing, and we don't see that declining anytime soon.
And just as a preview of coming attractions at Monday night school committee meeting, Mr. Boussier will be giving us an ELL update. Also, as right along with that, we're going to have a Sanford Community Adult Education update. Because one thing is, as we're talking with Jane Perkins, the director, she's seeing that their services for adults, for ESOL, is increasing. And what their intel has is these are parents of people whose families have not come yet. And we anticipate that they will be coming. So that also is one of those things that and so that'll be at Monday night school committee. Steve will be talking about ESOL, and Jane's going to be talking about community adult education, but one piece of that is she's also going to give you an idea of what they're seeing there for services on the adult ed that we anticipate are going to also show that trend that we're going to continue to increase on ours.
And when we look at our EPS formula, when we receive our state subsidy on Wednesday, that ESOL is an area where I would expect to see an increase in subsidy with that. So how much that increase is to be determined, but that is.
But we have more students in that area going through that formula, so there is going to be some subsidy that will be coming back.
But those students is also, we're mandated by the state to provide all those services. So that is something that we must do.
It's a federal law.
Right.
Yep.
So that position is actually currently being paid 80% out of that new grant that we got after the fact, and 20% by ESSER. So I've put it as ESSER because if it had to go back, it would be going into the ESSER money. And then we have a new ed tech for the high school, which with the new 5-block schedule, they needed someone to help study halls. And so an ed tech 3 is being on the list for that.
As we went through that presentation, right, all the work that went into, one of the concerns that we had was around the area of staffing. And so you are seeing that we're making some changes, as Steve mentioned earlier, on lessening teachers, but that was one area that Principal Peterman identified, anticipating to say, as we make this change, you're going to see an increase for people with study halls, and he has requested an ed tech that would be able to cover all of those for the different periods throughout the day for that.
Okay, so then going on to other expenses other than just salary and benefits, the purchase services or contracted services, we kind of use those two words intermittently, meaning the same thing, has decreased by 43.8% or $82,000. That's really your Head Start portion that we were talking about with the pre-K. Supplies is increased by 19.8% or $45,000. That includes $22,000 of the pre-K startup costs, and then $24,000 in supplies for additional art room supplies for the 5-block schedule in the high school. I thought Matt was going to say something because he was getting moved the microphone. Equipment is increased by 20.6% or $14,000. That is because the Pride Elementary School has asked for some additional desks and new wall padding for the gym that I believe is from the 80s, and for a total of $10,000, just over $10,000. The write-up on the note for pre-K, that's kind of taking all the different categories and telling you that one classroom, it's going to cost $48,000. We also have to remember last year we got additional revenue for pre-K in our state subsidy that we actually kind of made money off it last year. So just want to remind you of that. So if it costs a little bit this year, that's why.
And you're not going to see at this time an increase in students beyond the 96 that we already receive in the state subsidy. Steve, do you just want to talk about that in terms of maybe where we are in terms of demand for the pre-K?
Part of pre-K, and the way subsidy works is that if we do not fill the 96 seats, they will take away subsidy. So it's very important that we pay attention to that pre-K enrollment number. As we look to expand pre-K this past year, we were able to fill all our slots in September. When October 1st rolled around, we had lost one student. And so we ended up, for subsidy purposes, we had 95 students. In terms of a need, you have to demonstrate need to apply for grants. This past year, we did not have a wait list. September, October, we have a wait list now. There's a couple of families, 2 or 3 families that are waiting for a slot to open up. But we don't feel like we have at this time the demand to add an additional classroom, which would be 16 students. Down the road, as we go along, if we start to see we have a wait list, then it'll be time to expand for us with that. We are never going to be one-for-one for our kindergarten students with our pre-K population. Some families hold their kids out. They keep them home with them. Some of them engage in private daycare, private preschool. So we're never going to see a one-to-one. I do anticipate down the road, as our community grows, that pre-K will expand. We will expand our classrooms, but for now, I do not see the need for next year.
Okay, so any questions on Article 1? I think what I'd be looking for is some of these items that we may want to put on a revisit list, just as, you know, here we are as a starting point, but right now these may have to come back to be, to look to, for further discussion possibility in terms of once we go through the entire budget and also see our revenue.
And I also want to mention, out of Article 1, if you just turned the page on Article 1 and didn't have any of these new items, we would have had a 4.3% increase, or just over $700,000.
And that's primarily around salary and benefits. I do want to point out that we have, this year, as of today, I think we only have anticipating 5 retirements.
Yeah.
5 retirements. And so that's a little bit of a small number than what we've had. And so that's an opportunity where you can see benefits maybe possibly change in those particular situations. But the number is such that when you look at those salary and benefits with the increases, we feel pretty solid about those numbers because, as I said, that's just with people now who are working for us now. We turn that page over. So Cheryl does a nice job of here's what their salary is going to be next year, and here's what their benefits are going to be with that 9% increase. Now, what you may see is people will change some of their benefits. Sometimes you see in health insurance where some people might go from a single subscriber to 2 adults. They may go from 2 adults to a family. They may go the other way. They may go from a family down to 2 adults in those situations. But that's when and that 9% increase we're talking about is reflected in there as well.
Yes. Okay, so that's the end of Article 1.
Do we want to?
Any questions?
Yeah, just review what, any of those items that we want to be able to put on a revisit list down the line for maybe further discussion.
I think it's, look, at the end, then we'll, for me, I have to hear it all, and then I'll.
So I have a quick question on the, this gives us a 16-to-2 ratio with the ed techs. Do the ed techs don't count as a teacher in the state? You know what I mean?
No, they're in their own funding, which is, they get counted. They don't get counted as a teacher, they get counted as an ed tech.
They get counted in the formula,
Yep.
but
Right.
not as a teacher. There's an ed tech piece to that formula as well.
Okay, and so, and the state finds it necessary to have ed techs in the rooms, like that's so it's not messing up a subsidy at all for, okay.
So we're going to go on to Article 2. Okay. So special ed, special ed is up by 15% or 1.4 million. Remember that the funding for this is not 100%, but it's got a floor and a ceiling, and we're usually pretty close to being fully funded. Salaries and benefits have increased by 9.9%, or just over, or right around $850,000. We are starting to bring in some of the ESSER positions. Our resource room teachers, for 2 of them at CJL and 1 at middle school, are slated to come over into the local budget. There's a possibility of creating an assistant director position by changing a position to include that in the position. And then adding a new social worker, which we haven't had because we're finding a need for that at the high school. Contracted services has decreased by 2.1% or $20,000. Purchase services has an increase of $644,000. The increase is due to outside placement agencies for $647,000. Last year, we had mistakenly reduced the outside placements by $270,000 twice when we were working on the Baby Bridge program. There are 3 students that moved into the district needing outside placement to the cost of $265,000. And we have 12 students that can't be part of the bridge program. They have to go out to the outside placement. And so that is what creates that additional cost. Supplies has a decrease of 37.8% or $21,000. $20,000 of that is for the startup costs that we had in the budget last year of $20,000. And so if we were to take out all these extra items, the turn the page for Article 2 would have increased by 10.8% or just over $1 million.
So I'll jump in. Thank you, Cheryl. In talking about special education, it is a huge part of our budget. We've talked about this before. We may want to specify one of our upcoming budget workshops specifically to talk about special education so that we can really dig deep into that. So I don't think that today is the day for that. I think that would be time well served for us to be able to do that. I will say around what you have in front of you today at this executive summary level for that. You're looking at those resource room positions, and those are currently being covered by ESSER. Now, one of the things we looked at for ESSER was we wanted to make sure, hey, these are things that you have grant funding, but we don't want these positions to be able to have to come back into the local. And we understand that, and we understood the intent. We also know that there's needs in schools, also that the ESSER funds sometimes are able to get us some positions that we needed that we weren't able to get before, okay? Special education is another one of those, similar to looking at ESOL, for example. There are some compliance things that we are required by to be able to make sure that we have for our caseloads and our compliance. So the decision to put those first 3 positions into the local budget wasn't one that was just made easily. We understand the impact behind that. But we also know that when we start looking at caseloads and being able to make sure that we're in compliance through our 3 elementary schools, that's where those are needs there. Definitely for 2, and 1, I think, for further discussion for the 3rd one as we continue to be able to look at it. But on January 21st, we are putting those 3 positions out there, and we didn't do that lightly. We did that knowing that we have the numbers to demonstrate to back us up in that. You also will see the outside placements, and this was a concern to me as when we went to review this budget, the special education budget. Last year, as we were looking at a lot of one-time costs for us to transition and expand the bridge program, to move that from Anderson Learning Center over to Willard School, as we looked at that, in terms of numbers that were given us, a mistake was made that there was 270,000 taken off in the initial projection, and it was also taken off again. So that's something with that miscommunication, that they have the mistake there of 270,000. What you also have is we had 3 students move in over the summer to our district that did require that we were not going to be able to service either in the Sanford School Department or through the Bridge program. And so they were requiring an outside placements. Also, we do have, the Bridge program helps us, but the Bridge program is primarily around behavior, our ED population, but we do have other students who have other needs beyond that, particularly in the autism area, that are such that we're not able to meet those needs within the district that require the outside placement. So that's why you're seeing an increase in that area of 644,000 with it. We're also talking about, right now, I think one of the things we did as a school committee is we are going to be setting up a special education advisory committee. And I can see that one of the things that will be able to help is to be able to really look at special education, take the time to look into those so that we can make some recommendations for us to be able to continue to be able to offer quality programming and services for our students. It is such a significant part of our budget that makes sense for us to be able to do that. I see that committee really digging in and being effective. The issue is, here we are on January 21st, that committee is just really getting to going. So what we have in the budget would be an assistant director. And that assistant director would be able to be what I would say would be an interim basis. I wouldn't want to do anything until we've had, this is more of just, for us right now, what we would have is we'd be looking at the IEP coordinator, who we currently have at the middle school, in that position, would also be able to expand those responsibilities and to be able to, in essence, also be an assistant director to help out with that middle school program. And so we're able to do that at an additional cost of $29,457. So that would not be anything where we would be adding a person. We would be adjusting positions right now on an interim basis to help us to be able to come back with those needs. And so that's where I think in looking at the totality of this budget and its increase in our budget, it would probably make sense for us to have a workshop, one of our upcoming budget workshops, really focused on special education. Stacy Bissell can come in to be able to really go into that in more depth of what we have. Cheryl, anything to add on that?
Amy's got a question.
And I realize we're going to dig deeper at the special ed workshop with the budget. But just in the sense of this current school year, with the $9,696,000, did I hear you say, Cheryl, that this $9 million is all covered by state subsidy or just a portion of it?
It's a large portion of it. It's got a ceiling, like you can't increase it by a certain, they give us this is what you got last year, and it's always 2 years behind. So you get that amount plus a COLA factor, sort of. And then it says you can't go above this amount or below this amount. So if your next year, because you go based on 2021, now 2022, when they do the 2022 number, if you go, you have to be in between that ceiling and floor, and you get that full amount. So if your amount is less than that floor, you get the floor amount. If you're above that ceiling, you get the ceiling amount.
So approximately, is it 80% covered, 60%? When you say a portion, what does that mean?
I was waiting to see what we get for funding next year to tell you what percentage of that on Wednesday. So that will be part of that discussion, how much funding we get of a percentage. I don't have that with me today.
Okay.
But I'll mark that down to make sure I have that.
When we do get our preliminary EPS, you're going to see what they're going to be giving us for special education.
Yeah.
And so when you look at some of these requests that we've made, they may line up with, we may be getting additional funding to be able to understand, to help us with the compliance, to put that in with that. But as of right now, we won't know that until we get that, our preliminary EPS numbers. And the other thing I think in special education too, that will help us in that workshop is there is, special education does receive federal funding through an IDEA grant.
Correct.
Okay, and that's something that we've used that IDEA grant with our local funding to kind of be creative, to be able to cover the program, to cover the services that we have, and looking at that. So I think when we have that workshop, we can dig in deeper to also talk about IDEA and how that's being utilized to meet the needs of our students.
Right. For example, some of the speech and OT comes out of the IDEA, so it's not locally funded. Those are two examples of items I know are funded by IDEA, right off the top of my head. But I will also mark that as possible.
Sorry, just one more clarifying question. Out of this $9 million, that does include special ed employees and their benefits?
All of it.
All
Yep.
of it.
So all your resource room, your self-contained rooms, your summer programming is all included in this one article.
Okay.
I tried to find it over last night and I couldn't find it, which was to tell you what's included in each of the articles. So I will try to get that to you guys. I couldn't find it on the website, and I think I was on crunch time and I couldn't think properly of where to find it. So I'll try to make sure I have that included in our next meeting so that you have that.
Any questions on Article 2? Okay, we'll move over to Article 3, which is Career and Technical Education. This is where the SRTC portion of our budget.
Correct. So career and technical, SRTC is increasing by 6.9% or $270,000. A large portion of their programming is also salary and benefits. So they're adding an ed tech. We're moving an ed tech. How do we do that? We moved it out of this article into Article 1 because it was the pre-K ed tech, and it wasn't included in their formula, so why include them in their formula, or in their section? So we moved them out into the MCS budget, because that's where it's actually getting funded out of. It's under the EPS formula, not under the CTE formula. So we're just right-sizing it. We have a special projects ed tech that currently is being paid out of the Perkins grant, but with the increases in salary and benefits, the Perkins grant is not going to be able to sustain the two positions. So we're asking to move the ed tech from the Perkins grant into the local. We're taking the WSSR-TV personnel and moving them out of this article because it's not funded by the CTE funding, and moving it to Article 11, which is where we include PAC. And then the law enforcement teacher is becoming an actual employee instead of a contracted position because he was under the SRO. So it's increasing your salary and benefits by that $112,000. However, if you see the next line down, contracted services has decreased by the $103,000 for the SRO. So that's just a move within the same area, just changes the two different types. So it's moving from being a contractor service up to being an employee. Supplies have increased by 20% or $78,000. Most of that is actually the electricity and gas, because they take a portion of that high school building. They get 35% of the total costs for the building, and so that is why that amount is going up. So if you do a turn the page, they're increasing by 7%, or $274,000. The reason why their turn the page is actually higher is because we're moving a couple of positions out, and so I kind of called those as not turning the page, so. But that's and I did notice I have a typo, because the WSSR-TV is not a Perkins grant, and neither is the law enforcement teacher. So I forgot to blank those out.
So a couple things that I'll just add on to that. Some of this is just changing. Obviously, what we've done is we try to include anything in this budget that's going to be able to help us get subsidy because of how CTE funding is funded in the EPS formula. So there's a couple areas that we're not getting any funding for. Right, the pre-K over at SRTC, it made sense to put it there when it was the only pre-K that we had, but now it doesn't make sense to keep it there. So there's going to be moving that over and doing it. We also have a special projects ed tech. You'll notice it's listed down there in the box as building trades ed tech. It's really a special projects ed tech that works with all of our programs to be able to help them really make that connection between what's happening in the classroom and what might be happening out in the community. We listed it as the building trades ed tech because this person does a lot of work as the go-between between our students building the house and then being able to get that placed in the community. That's something that we wouldn't put as an expectation onto our teacher, for example, to be able to do that. So the special projects is a position that we've had. It's something that we've always worked to be able to help that connection with our programming to the community in a lot of different ways for that. As Cheryl mentioned, that's something that has been covered by the Perkins grant, but with the Perkins grant funds not increasing, and you're looking at what the needs are and what that person's able to do, it does make sense for it to be able to be something that we consider picking up in the local portion of our budget for it. And then the other one, WSSR-TV, that's another one. Initially, we were able to use WSSR-TV because our video production program works pretty closely together. And with that, so initially, that's where that was placed, and we were receiving funding for that. We're no longer receiving funding for that, so that also makes sense for us to move that out of that budget into Article 11. And then what we've done as part of the contracted services that we have with the city's police department, with our school resource officers, we had our SRO had started, one of our SROs had started the law enforcement program at SRTC. And so that was coming into that we have 3 SROs. We had the law enforcement teacher at SRTC. We have an SRO at the high school. We have an SRO at the middle school. The high school and middle school SRO kind of help with our middle school, our elementary school rather, needs that we may have there for an SRO. Well, the SRO that has been the law enforcement who started the program is retiring from the police department, and so by retiring from the police department, still very much interested in continuing to be the law enforcement instructor, which is great. We're very pleased with that, for that to continue. That's in the best interests of all of our students, but that does then change some of the how that funding is done. He's coming over into the local part now, and out of that contracted services part, still in the local, but coming out of the contracted services, that his salary and benefits are now what we hit. And what you're seeing is that there is a difference. There will be a difference, I think $8,000 or something like that. That will be additional cost for us in the local, but you're also going to see an additional cost because we've continued to keep the 3rd SRO. So even though we'll have a law enforcement teacher, we are still continuing with the 3 SROs in the contracted services that's in that, that's in this budget for it. Questions, comments, feedback on SRTC on Article 3?
Real quick, the 274, 707, are we taking out that 103? Like, are we, because you said the contractor services decreased by 103, is that already removed? Like, I know you're not removing it from that number, correct?
We're taking it out of the contracted services and putting it up into salary and benefits.
Right, so this 7% increase has that, like, out of it already?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And just knowing that all the grants and everything with the state in the sense of the technical, oh my God, SRTC, sorry, I was forgetting the word. That, I just out of curiosity, I have the budget, like for this current school year is 4 million, right? I have that right?
Yep.
Almost 4 million. And then next year, I would just, again, kind of same as special ed, like, don't need it now, but would love to know just the percentage that is actually, we are state funded for, and then how much of that is local budget.
Yep. I'll mark that down.
And then I guess also going along with what the other schools contribute as well. And then the bottom line of what Sanford pays for SRTC after money comes from those places.
Okay.
And I know that the state, has for many reasons, the positive push for the trades and the SRTC education throughout the state. Just curious if there's any more funding coming, given that they all know that wire's more expensive, wood's more expensive, and all of those expenses are up for everybody, in particular the trades. Just curious if they end up, we're going to give more funding because of it.
So actually, we have received additional funding for that. We got a $100,000 CTE grant from the state of Maine for supplies, and that's what it was strictly for. And so they had to submit what they were going to use it for, what trades, and of course, the big ones are the building trades and electrical, plumbing. Those costs have gone up drastically for supplies, so she has a lot of that getting paid for from that grant. Also some equipment, it could be supplies and equipment, and they got some additional equipment that we needed to replace too, that was able to be paid for by that $100,000 grant.
It may make sense in one of our future meetings to have Kathy come in, because Kathy does, one thing we try to do with all of our, when it comes to budgeting, all of our directors, all of our principals, is we really try to make sure that we stay away from these variations and these wide spikes. We try to look at asking them to do 5-year plans so that they can be able to say, okay, what are the needs that people have? For example, that's everything from athletics, right? What caused your athletics to go up? Sometimes it's your uniforms. Everyone would like new uniforms every year, but you've got to be able to kind of divide a schedule that would show you over that how that rotation is going to work. Kathy Sargent, SRTC director, does something with that with the equipment, that she kind of looks at it through a 5-year plan to say, I usually have this amount of money, these are the needs that I have, and I'll try to balance that out with the 5 years. What this grant did was additionally come in for some of those areas to help us fast track some of those things that, with those costs in those areas that had gone up in doing that. The other thing I think with Kathy coming in, we are a receiver, so we have sending schools who come to us for SRTC. There's the different ways how that formula works. We collect subsidy for that. And so you may say, well, wait a minute, where do the other sending schools, what do they contribute? Well, some of that is when it comes to the capital budget that Kathy has, that there's capital budget, that gets divided up by all of our sending schools based on a per pupil of how many students people are sending. We, being the host site, we have the most number of students, but we don't participate in that capital funding. That's where the benefit comes in for Sanford to say, we don't do that because there are all these costs and things that come back for us to be able to run the program and for the sending schools. That's the model that's been in place I think probably forever, and that's been able to come back and work for us as we able to try to evaluate the pluses for that, for us to be able to do that funding. So I think it may make sense to also, an additional upcoming, is have Kathy come in and speak a little bit to the SRTC in a little bit more detail.
And I think when Kathy comes, just also just having part of, like, just out of curiosity, knowing that we've had SRTC teachers come when we were talking about the high school schedule and this and that, and the additional cost at the fifth block cost, and just, you know, how much additional supplies that increases their budget also.
And, yeah, and so you'll notice as we dig into the budget, that was a question that we had to say, hey, is that funded in there? Because you'll notice we haven't seen a wide variation of increase. So that, to me, my first question was, as I was looking through that, was like, what's going on here? And there is a number in there that's been able to keep for what they've had because of that grant that has come in to be able to do that, that Cheryl mentioned, has helped keep that in where we're very comfortable that that's going to be able to help our SRTC teachers with that additional Block 5.
So that's, there's 13,000 in the budget, in the actual budget in one of the lines for that. And then the other thought is moving that ed tech out of the Perkins grant, is that there's additional funds that would be still sitting there to use also.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we want to take a break?
I would love.
We might need a little more than 5, because I know we're all, well, everyone's heading to the bathroom, I guess, imagine, so, yeah, I'd say probably a 10-minute break to be able to do that. Article 4. Article 4 is other instruction. That is primarily where you'll find your athletics aspect on this. And so, Cheryl, I'll turn it over to you to explain what we're looking for changes in Article 4.
So, and athletics has increased by 14.3%, or $158,000. Majority of that is in salary and benefits, but the 3 positions are for coaching positions for the 7th and 8th grade boys lacrosse, 7th and 8th grade girls lacrosse, and 7th and 8th grade volleyball. And those are new programs that he'd like to add to the middle school. Contracted services includes $11,625 for an additional 10 hours for the athletic trainer. That would bring both athletic trainers up to 30-hour positions. Supplies have includes $5,300 for the volleyball net system for the middle school for the new programming, and new equipment included of $20,000 for a batting cage for the high school. I just wanted to note that if you, the total cost of the lacrosse programs is $12,058 that is included in this budget, and the volleyball program is $4,900 plus $5,300 for the volleyball net system. So those are all, that's, taking all the different categories and bringing them together, so you knew what those total costs were for those 3 new programs at the middle school.
Because what's listed up above are just the actual coaching stipends, but this would also be additional for transportation, uniforms, paying for officials, those types of things that also go along with it. So we kind of broke that cost out for you. What we have right now is currently we do have contracted services for our athletic trainers. They do a nice job for us. This would be an increase of 10 hours for the second one, and that would bring them both up to having 30 hours a week for us for athletic training. I think you'd be looking at a lot of those services there would be going towards middle school, where there's needs there. So there'd be an expansion going beyond filling in high school in those areas where we need to, depending on what's going on for that particular week, or those particular games or activities, but it'd be also expanding that to the middle school. And then, as you know, the sports that the most recent sports that we've added at Sanford High School are around boys and girls lacrosse and volleyball. And so this would be, as mentioned earlier, as I talked about kind of the phase-in, this was the phase-in as also having those programs at the middle school level so that that could be kind of a feeder system to be able to help with the high school going that way. We talked about the equipment needs by expanding the program, the volleyball program to the middle school. We also are looking to put in, there's a request from the athletic director looking at having a batting cage put in down at the high school and the technical center. We do have, the one that we have is at Memorial Gym, and that was where it was when we were back at the old high school. And so there is a request to look at moving that for both the baseball and softball teams to have at the high school. And so that's where you're looking at. Now, also in that budget, you're going to see some increases that have gone up around the area of fees and a lot of officials' fees, in that you'll see that officials' fees have gone up across the board in all of our sports, in some areas significantly. Usually those would be kind of on a rotating basis of when they would negotiate, but they've all come back and negotiated, and some of those are looking at, there is a, in most areas, a lack of officials, And so when you have a lack of officials, they're looking at what they can do to recruit new ones and hold on to the ones that they have. And usually that means increased fees for the officials for that. So that's pretty much the overview of Article 4 and the changes there. Any questions?
Yeah. And one of the costs that increased fairly drastically was maintaining the football helmets. That was a fairly substantial increase that we always have that cost in there, but it jumped up a fair amount this year. It's gotten very expensive,
And that is,
the going rate.
yeah, Cheryl said that's the going rate. We look at that to say, what's going on in this particular area? Are there different services and different things that we can use? And they're not. That's obviously the big emphasis on safety around those areas are a big part of that, but it's not like we've looked around or had the athletic director look around to make sure that is the going rate.
Mm-hmm.
So do we have any questions on Article 4 and the increases there that would see for athletics? Right now, as we've gone along, is it the wish of the school committee not to put anything on any revisit items at this time? We'll just kind of hold that, or are there at least some lists of things that we'd want to be able to move on to that? I just want to make sure that what your wish is.
I just, like I said, need to go through all of them and then come back with that answer.
Okay. Works for us. All right, so
Article 5?
we'll move on to Article 5.
So Article 5 is called Staff and Support Services, and it includes your counselors, nursing, library, curriculum, technology. Those are all part of this article. It has increased by 3.6%, or $144,000. Salary and benefits have increased by 13.3%, or $386,000. One of the technology positions is now an employee versus a contracted service. So we've moved that money up into into salary and benefits. We tried to hire it as an external contracted service, but we weren't able to get anybody, so we had to bring it on as a staff member. Purchase services or contractor services has decreased by 51.1%, or $73,000. And so that was $37,000 worth of a technology position that we had contracted out. And now that's the one that I was talking about that's in the salary and benefits. And then $24,000 was a one-time cost that we had for an installation of access points for the high school. And so that has gone down by that amount. We have included additional costs for repairs of equipment of about $12,000. That was covered by ESSER money over the past 2 years, but that is no longer available through the ESSER funds. Equipment has decreased by $156,000, and that was because we had one-time costs last year of $130,000 for the high school access points, and then a one-time cost for the Willard Building technology upgrades of $74,000. So as I noted here, there were $255,000 worth of one-time expenses that was included in this budget for IT or technology that we used carryover to cover those last year. And so if you turn the page of Article 5, it has increased by 9.6%, or $386,000. And so we have
Let me jump in before we get to the 5-year plans. No, thanks. A couple things with this. One of those was we had a technology support person that worked at Sanford Middle School in community adult education for many years, and he worked under a contracted service. And so he retired, and when he retired, we continued to try to continue that in a contracted service. And so we tried a lot of different things. but we were unsuccessful. There was just nothing out there that we were going to be able to have a contracted service to get what we had before or anything close to it at the cost that where we'd had.
Yeah.
So we'd come back in needing that position. We did advertise that, and then, so that's been filled, but now it's not in a contracted service position, it's in the local position. One of the things that we did with COVID was when it came to our technology, we let our students take that technology home throughout the district. And so that was necessary, that was needed for people to be able to, if it was going to be remote learning or to be able to help with educational recovery. So that was a decision we made, one that we're glad we made and supported. Well, when you do have people taking their technology home where they hadn't taken it home before, you are going to have damage. And so that damage has gone up. And so in the budget, you'll see there's repairs of equipment for that that we now are in this budget that used to be in ESSER. One of the things I think we're going to want to look at as a school committee that we are currently looking at the central office and administrator level is what are we going to do for technology to go home? What's the responsibility going to be for people when equipment is broken? And are we going to be looking at any models of things that we might have to help cover some of that damage that is done? Right now, that is something that we are, when COVID happened, that we were able to come back and take that on. We have the funds, but as of right now, those repair costs for technology breaks are going home, breaks from going home primarily are a $12,000 difference. And then the other thing you see is how where this cost, where a lot of the shift was. Last year, we did try to opportunities to use carryover money that we had. And the money that we have, obviously, as you use that, you're doing your best so that you're not trying to create cliffs when that money goes away. You try to focus that on one-time costs, and we had done that really around the area of helping us get Willard ready as we worked with the city to move our community adult education program from Anderson Learning Center to Willard, and also moving the bridge program and expanding it. There were some one-time costs there that were with carryover. I did mention earlier that we do our best to try to make sure with these budgets, especially around the areas of our facilities and our maintenance, our technology, and our curriculum, to try to have a 5-year plan with those so that it kind of helps us be able to meet the needs, but it avoids trying to do any of these types of spikes that could really come back and impact a budget. So I'll turn it back over to Cheryl if she wants to.
I just also want to make one more comment about the $12,000 for repairs. That also includes replacing chargers that people lose.
Yeah.
And I want to say that's a fairly substantial cost. It's $50 to replace just one charger.
Yeah, and I can't help myself. As I have a son home from college, I am sharing my charger with him. So I think this is something that is a problem
Common
all the way
occurrence.
around. But yeah, we're short on chargers.
I'll second that with Matt.
I will say, having 2 at the middle school, or 3 actually, but my 5th and 6th graders, I actually don't want them taking their laptops home, but they are not allowed to keep them at school. So I don't know of how many other kids, because they don't use them and they just fling them around my house. I don't know if it would be cost effective for us to buy a locker for each classroom so that they could get locked. For whatever reason, they're not allowed to stay at the school. And I don't know if that's theft, but it might be more cost efficient if we buy locked cabinets that the kids can keep them overnight instead of bringing them back and forth when they're not being used. I can't be the only one.
Oh, no, I totally agree with you.
Technology and parenting, it's beautiful.
Okay, so
We don't want them, keep them. Yeah, I got you.
It's gonna break out my watch, you know what I mean, and bring them home.
yeah. So the 5-year plan for curriculum is going to be the first 5-year plan we're going to look at. And then I'm going to turn it over to Beth to kind of go through it a little bit. Oh, yes. So they're not in your packet because your books actually have it. So if you look at the last 3 tabs of your book, you're going to see one that says curriculum 5-year plan, one's going to say technology, and one's going to say facilities. So it should be the last 3 tabs. So if you would look at the one that's curriculum, you'll see it has a red line going across to kind of help you know which one you're looking at. Yep. And so Beth, turning it over to you.
All right. Hello, everybody. So part of my position is to make sure that I keep up with a 5-year plan, and that includes the rotation of any online licenses that have to be purchased, as well as replacement of different curriculum pieces like books and other items. So what I've done is I've broken it down by departments. So you'll see the first one is the ELA department, and that covers everybody from pre-K all the way to high school and bridge. And I have it kind of broken down so you can see the different pieces that I have to purchase. I don't have to go into super depth, right? No, okay. And you'll notice that as you go across from the years, there is a slight increase, and I've worked with Cheryl so we can try to figure out how much things might go up, and really the biggest increase right now is shipping. When I have books and stuff shipped, it's almost 20% of what the purchase is. So that's where a substantial part of my increase has come in, as we made sure that I budgeted for that. Then at the very bottom, I start with, right after ELA, we go into math. And again, I break it down by elementary. You'll notice that I purchased licenses for and it should be changed to Reveal math licenses each year for the elementary, as well as consumables and manipulatives. They have a lot of hands-on activities that they use with their math, and they do get lost, broken. So each year I have money in the funds to replace so teachers have everything they need. And then with the middle and high school, you'll notice that I do mark down, this is the 3rd year of 3, so the next year my budget for that particular grade level will go up because I'll have to renew the online licenses. And one of the things we're finding is a lot of these curriculum companies are moving to completely online. In that textbooks paper, they don't even offer them anymore. So that's something that we have to take an account for as we move forward in our curriculum, because you could purchase a curriculum textbook and not have to replace it for a few years, but now we have to think about yearly renewals. And then you'll see I have a math total. And again, you'll see a little bit of a jump for the 24-25 school year, and that's because I do have to renew licenses. And then we move on to science. Again, they do have some online components, and so I do have when they're going to need to be renewed so that I can keep that into my budget. Let's see. And then we move on to social studies. They use an online component called TCI, K through 8. And again, that is all online, so those are yearly renewals of licenses that I have to purchase. Social studies, so then you see the total there. Then I have items for health and PE, whether it's for replacement of resources that they use in their classrooms or supplements to their curriculum. And I do have a spot for world language, music and art for the 3 levels. And then I do also have a section for social emotional learning. I support the purchase of the Second Step and the Character Strong curriculums across the district. And I try to break it down so you can see each total. So you can see my curriculum total for next year is about $292,400. And then I break it down a little further into testing. We do have to pay for NWEA, even though it's a state test. We still have to purchase K1, 2, and grade 9. So I need to keep that in my budget to make sure that we are able to support that. And then for our response to intervention, we have some different resources, our LLI for our title teachers, different math supplies, behavior coaches. So that's kind of all in there. And so the grand total of all of that comes to just a little over $366,000. And then then you have my licenses and memberships, and then PD travel for gifted and talented. So it's all right there. So you can see my curriculum total. Whoops, sorry. This is a little up here at the top, going across the 5 years. Is pretty consistent, so. Questions?
Well, I'll jump in. No, Beth did an excellent job with her budget, because you're getting what you can see is the 5-year plan that's trying to do what we look for is to avoid those spikes with that the best that we can. You've got this transition going on from moving into the digital platforms. And Beth has done, there's going to be annual costs, but Beth has also tried to be able to rotate those out when there's going to be the new versions and the new upgrades that go beyond the annual costs, to be able to look at that. You'll see in there that there's not a lot of purchasing of teacher libraries or our libraries, because Beth has done an outstanding job of taking advantage of the federal funds that we've had to really bring those up to a place where probably prior to that they were below par, and now we're at a point where they are been up and done a nice job significantly. So you're not going to see a lot of that in this budget. You may be asking for that, but that's because right now the need is not there, based on Beth's ability to access other resources for that.
And I'd just like to add she has money in her budget for professional development. We also have another funding source for professional development through federal funds, through our federal Title II funds. So in the local side, in terms of professional development, you'll see small amounts throughout. Just know that the majority of our money for professional development comes from that Title II federal funds. So.
The RTI, that 49,000, is that when I'm looking at sort of like those supplies for like the math interventionists and such, that does not go into the special education funding?
Correct.
Correct, okay.
Yeah, there's she's got, under her budget, she's got 3 groupings.
Yeah.
Curriculum, RTI, and gifted and talented.
Right, and then just for, a fun fact that I learned 2 years ago, which I didn't know before, is the gifted and talented, we actually are like reimbursed almost 100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
So our next 5-year plan we're going to look at is technology.
Oh, darn it, hold on.
Did you just close it?
Sorry. You click one button, they all disappear.
There we go. So you'll see a tab in your books that say technology, and that budget is a 5-year plan also. We kind of have a bunch of different funding sources, so I'm going to kind of go through and explain some of those. But the top section is out of our local budget, which goes down to the blue line. And so you can see what we're planning on working on. Document cameras are a big thing that a lot of our elementary schools use, and some of the other schools would like to bring some of that into their departments also. So that's one of the initiatives, is making sure we have document cameras. And so there's always repair, replace, new teacher, and getting new ones for when we need to. Promethean boards, we're working on replacing Promethean boards, like at the high school. Some of them are starting to break down, and we need to start replacing them. And so the initiative is we should be at 1 Promethean board in every classroom by the end of this school year. And so now we're at the point where we have to start replacing some of the older ones. There's one of the types that we have at the high school that you can't get parts for anymore, and so those are going to be our first priority. And then we have installation of those Promethean boards. And then we have CJL displays that are in the IT budget also, is trying to make them equitable where she doesn't really have the displays that some of the other schools have in the hallways and stuff like that to be able to put announcements and stuff. And so she would like to have those in her building. And then we have copier, printers, and device replacements for $39,900, and that's a bunch of different things. It could be a desktop printer, it could be a copier, which we also use as printers, and then also if we have a new teacher and we need a new device for them or whatever. So that's what that cost is for. So that brings you down to the blue line, and so that is in the Article 5 budget. The yellow line, which is cameras, we're always looking to try to get grants through the COPS grant or any grants that we can get for cameras. And so we don't have one in the docket right now, but we're looking and trying to find to always pay for our cameras through not us paying for them. Let's put it that way. So we're always looking for federal money to try to pay for those. E-rate, we have two groupings of devices that are going to be getting paid for by the E-rate program. And so you will see that those two amounts for the two different age brackets or class brackets. You'll see up above, back in that blue section, in the 5th year, is you're seeing Chromebooks again for 9 through 10 for $52,000. I put it in the local budget, but that could end up moving back down to E-rate. But we can't guarantee that E-rate will be there in 5 years, so we have to be planning to pay for it if not. The next grouping we have is the MLTI grant, and this is the 3rd year of that grant. The first year, it paid for 2 grades worth of devices for 7th and 8th grade. Last year, it paid for the 6th, or the current year we're in, it paid for 6th grade, and next year, it's going to be paying for the 5th grade devices. And then we have another local expense, which is this $30,000. Part of E-rate is that you have to pay a portion, and so we always budget $30,000 in our budget to pay for matching grants. So we say it's slated for E-rate because most commonly that's the one that's a matching grant for us, and so we have that in the budget, in our local budget to pay for the local match. And so that is our technology budget. You can see we have some fluctuation a little bit, but we're trying to keep them pretty flat. The ones that we like keeping flat is that blue line, trying to make it so that it doesn't have drastic cost fluctuations. We are finding that devices are getting more and more expensive. Some of the state funding that we get for our devices, the MLTI, sometimes it will pay for the whole thing. We're worried that eventually it may not pay for the whole thing, and we may be liable to pay a portion or something as the costs go up. But you know, this is all speculation. We don't know what's going to be coming down the pike. But
And I'll just jump in. I know sometimes other school departments, other school committees struggle when it comes to a technology budget. One thing for us is you'll notice here that we are 1-to-1 throughout our district. We don't have them in pre-K for obvious reasons yet. But we are 1-to-1, and you know there's a cost to technology, but I think if you look at this plan, you're seeing that we're doing that creatively. We're taking away other funding sources and maximizing those, and we've got a plan to be able to do that so that you're not going to see those spikes that I talked about when you look at it to say we have to add or expand into the elementary, for example. We've already got that, and I think as you look at that, there's some unknowns in terms of those different funding resources, sources that we have, but I think I know as a superintendent, I'm proud of the work that former tech director Joan Wright did and that Carrie's taken on for us to be able to really have a plan together that I think meets the district's needs, helps us with the idea of replacement. And the other thing you'll see in this is the area of equity. We're really putting an idea to make sure of, for example, there's some things that Carl J. Lamb may be getting that is because of other elementary schools were able to get in during the expansion, the renovation that they had to do that. So questions on the technology plan or the technology budget?
You want to do Article 6, or you want me?
I'll do it. Yep, and just so you know, I mentioned the other 5-year plan that we have is around maintenance and facilities, so that's its own article coming down, so we didn't forget that. We didn't move on. That's coming for that. Okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the $10,000 for the school committee.
Yep. Okay, so for system administration, this is Article 6, and this is really the article that covers central office personnel, and the school committee. And so you look at that and say, oh, wow, you've increased 7.3% or $73,000. What is going on there? Did Nelson give himself a huge raise or what? What is going on? So let me break that down for you, because I know when I looked at that with Cheryl, I said, that can't be right. And she said, no, because some of that is changing in benefits that I talked about. Just remember, one change in those benefits with some that you replaced an employee, for example, who might have been at a single, but now it's a full family, for example. For health insurance, that really makes a drastic shift in doing that. So we have not expanded central office in terms of any new positions in doing that. So that's what you're seeing with salary and benefits is primarily the increase there. We also, in this budget, have increased the stipend to pay the school committee. And that increase has gone over, that's an additional cost of $10,000. Mm-hmm. And one thing, we did that, I know former school committee member reached out to us, and who knows the responsibilities, who knows the job, who knows all of the meetings and the executive sessions and the workshops and everything that's required of that position, and felt that no one likes to see increases, but felt that this was well-deserved in doing that. So that's something that we did put in. This also looks at, it's more aligned in terms of where the city is as well for that. Obviously, similar areas of responsibility. I think for us, some of this used to say for a school committee, hey, the middle of June comes and it'd be like, all right, we'll see you later. We'll see you back at the beginning of September. You, as those of Kelly and Melissa get ready, you can still take summer vacation, but guess what? There's going to be the work and stuff that never stops. So I feel that this is very much justified to be able to put in there as part of that increase. Probably for further discussion, but at the end of the day, also think it's justified. Questions on Article 6 in system admin? All right, so if you look at that, turning the page, it is, for that, would be the $63,742. And then a lot of that would be the change there, would be, as I mentioned, in benefit salaries, but it is that also increase of $10,000 for those stipends. Okay.
Article 7, school administration, which are all your school administrators, principals, assistant principals, etc., and general office staff end up in Article 7. It increased by 2.6% or $68,000. Most of the, all that expense change really is in salary and benefits, and it's strictly just due to the changes of benefit options and changes in personnel. So, somebody either took we hired a new person, they make less or they make more, and chose different health insurances and stuff like that. So this article really is just strictly people, and very very little bit of supplies for the general offices. So the turn the page for Article 7 is actually the same dollar amount, so there's no difference. So that's really what that expense
And there's
increase
no,
is.
with that, you'll see there's no added positions with
Nope.
that going forward.
Correct. Article 8, which is our transportation. Transportation has increased by 2.6% or 54,000. The district is in their final year of contract with Ledgmere for the 2023-2024 school year. We'll be working on a bidding process during the 2023-2024 school year to go out to bid for that. Oh, and I forgot to finish this one. I moved a small portion of auto insurance. It's $6,000 of auto insurance that I moved into Article 9. It didn't belong in this category, so I moved it out. That's why it's not the 3% increase that it normally should have been. All the Ledgmere stuff has a 3% increase, but there's a couple lines I kept at the current budget amount because we hadn't used the full amount. And then that one change of moving to Article 9 made it so we're not at the full 3%.
So Cheryl, maybe you can speak to, we do, just for people who may be watching, when it comes to transportation, the Sanford School Department, we do not own our own school buses. So what you'll find is many school departments do, not all, but many do. And when you do that, you own your buses, you hire your bus drivers, you have the mechanics, you have to be required for all the testing and the training. We don't. We contract out, and so as Cheryl mentioned, we had a contract with Ledgmere. That contract allowed us initially with a 3-year with a 2-year rollover option. And so we are in the second of that 2-year rollover, or this upcoming year will be the 5th year of that. And as Cheryl said, we'll be going out to bid. So I think, Cheryl, can you talk about, this will be coming on Wednesday when you break down the EPS formula, but there is money that we do get reimbursed for transportation. Can you talk to that?
So transportation funding is similar to special ed, and it's pretty much fully reimbursed by the state. There is that ceiling in the floor, similar to the other ones. So we are actually getting a majority of our money back. There's very small amounts that we're not getting back. I'll add that to my list when I do the EPS formula to tell you that percentage. But it's pretty much dollar for dollar, and I just didn't think about giving you that percentage.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's similar.
It's
just 2
similar,
years.
it's close. I don't think
Yeah.
it's completely, but I think there's some that does bleed over a little bit into the local.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that's not, a big change
No.
or an impact to the budget, or increase to the budget beyond what would be the natural increase.
Correct. And that full amount, and Steve and I will be working on that bidding process together, because that's a fairly substantial bid. So we will definitely be doing that one together. And we've already had meetings with Acton regarding that too. So we are definitely been already working on it. So Article 9. Oh, any questions on Article 8? Yep, so right now, we're currently, going back to Article 8, currently we're saving money based on routes that are not being covered. And so that money, whatever savings we have on that money, will actually go towards our unassigned fund balance at the end of the year if we don't use all that money. Right now, I think we got 3 routes, if I remember right, that aren't running. and approximate $200,000 savings.
Yeah, currently there's 3 routes, but I think the concern is that if we don't spend our money that we have budgeted for transportation, it will come back to bite us the following year when the EPS formula there is released. So
Yes.
that's the concern, and so taking that money and putting it in the reserves, so if, in the future, as we work, to make sure we're not left short.
Correct.
Is a
And
portion,
we get the money back from the state. That's where
Yeah.
you might look at this and say, hey, my son's route got changed or whatnot, savings. We have to be very careful how we, with the process, how we organize that has to be done in a way that's not going to come back to bite us when it comes back to future funding.
so is a portion of sort of the savings because of the lack of bus drivers? And I say that because the Springvale route that my kids are on, the high school and middle school are 3 to a seat many a days, which is extremely tight for larger children, especially with the high school. So
Yeah,
if we had more drivers, we wouldn't have the savings, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then compounding that is when you start adding on book bags and lacrosse sticks and those types of things, it even becomes more challenging. And that's a daily conversation that we have.
I do want to say, in terms of our pre-K students, right now we're running a separate run with, for pre-K at Head Start and SRTC. And so all our other pre-K students are riding our existing buses. So when we budgeted for transportation last year, we did have a dollar amount in there for pre-K students because we weren't sure if we were going to do separate routes, but we've been able to absorb them into our existing routes. So that money for transportation for pre-K students is very minimal at this point, so.
Okay. Article 9. Facilities management is pretty much what this whole Article 9 is about. It is increasing by 4.7% or $287,000. The salary and benefits is going up by 12.1% or $261,000, but that's because we're bringing in 2 additional positions that have been being paid for by ESSER. They're included in the ESSER funding that ends this year because that was for keeping the schools clean and safe for our kids. So we're bringing those 2 positions back in under the umbrella. So that's what that is. Contracted services, I combined all of our contracted and purchased services all together because we've changed categories of where they're actually going, so it was easier to talk about the whole piece. It's decreasing by 7.4% or $139,000. People are probably going, wow, you're actually decreasing. But it was because we had the one-time cost for Willard Building of $431,000 last year. And the increase without the Willard Building included in last year's budget and looking at it without that in there, it would have actually been an increase of $291,000 or 20%. We're including the new SRO. This is where this SRO shows up in here for $96,000. And then capital improvement is going up $12,277. And then the remaining increase is really due to contracted services are increasing their hourly rates. They're giving us fuel surcharges for coming out to do service calls. The rates are just going through the roof for contracted services. So that is really what is driving that increase. We have in this budget an additional $29,000 in supplies for safety items, shades, and what was that other item that you gave me?
In terms of safety items, we have at the high school, the radio coverage up there at the high school. We have dead spots, and we've done workarounds, but at this time, we feel that we need to put a repeater in at the high school, so the high school will have its own channel. And so there's cost associated with the fees with the FCC and then to have that antenna installed on the top of the roof. That's a big expense. The second expense that we have is in regards to a number of our doors, our classroom doors, they don't have shades, and so working to purchase shades to take care of that. Third item is at the high school, we have a lot of glass classrooms, and we're looking to put a film over those classrooms, and so that is that third safety expense. Now, there are some other safety expenses that we've taken care of in this budget, but those are the big ones that we're moving forward into next year's budget with that.
Okay, thank you. And then utility costs are going up $194,000 or 16.7%, and that's for the gas, oil, and electricity. I really did a lot of analysis on that grouping, making sure that we were right-sizing it, because I knew there was a substantial electricity and gas increase, so I wanted to make sure that we were budgeting that compared to what we're actually using, because we're finally at the point where the high school's been open long enough to know how much they're actually using, and that was one of our biggest unknowns in the prior years. So I did a lot of analysis to right-size that. A portion of the facility also includes debt, which is down by $34,000. The debt that comes through this grouping is the non-funded by the state of Maine debt comes into this article. And then, of course, last year we had the $431,000 for the Willard building that was paid out of carryover last year. And then for turn the page for Article 9, it increased by 7.2% or $440,000. And Matt looks like he wants to say something.
Before you go into the 5-year plan for capital, I do want to talk about those 2 custodian positions that are added now coming from ESSER, coming into the local budget. I think they were initially paid by CARES funding.
Yep.
With that falls under ESSER. But as many of you know, we've had a lot of changes in the Sanford School Department over the years in terms of the new high school, the new technical center. We expanded Margaret Chase Smith School. We moved the junior high over to the old high school for Sanford Middle School. We moved 5th grade over there, so we had grades 5 through 8 there. And then we renovated Pride, the old junior high, to the new Sanford Pride Elementary, closed Willard to the elementary school. So as you look at that, those have been wonderful changes for our district, but there's also the challenge for us to maintain those buildings, and we've had there's increased space with that. We had an analysis, an outside group that came in for analysis to be able to say, okay, let's make sure that this is what we have for the space to clean, but this is also what we have for resources. This is what we have for custodians. And we did that analysis to make sure that we were using the best cleaning methods, the best to maximize what we had for our resources and being able to do that. And so as we did that study, we did find out that we were 2 custodians, in essence, 2 custodians short. And so one of those would be half-time at the middle school and half-time at MCS. You had Margaret Chase Smith School with the expansion. And so there's 1 full-time position amongst those 2 shared areas, and then there's also another one at Sanford Middle School. So we've gone through to be able to do that, and so we've been covering those through the CARES funding, but for us to maintain the level of cleaning that we want, to maintain that, we do need to have these 2 positions to be able to maintain. If they can't, then obviously we're going to have to adjust some of our standards that are not unreasonable or over the top. These are for us to be able to invest in our facilities and maintain those. I know that, for example, in the position of the Sanford Middle School and Margaret Chase Smith School that is shared, we have run into the challenge of filling that position. And so we're working with our custodian union, and one of the things that we are looking at doing is breaking that position up to see if it can be like a part-time position. So instead of working what would be full-time 8 hours at the two schools, you'd be working a 4-hour shift. And if so, then there'd be savings there in doing that. So we're anxious. We've just posted that out to see if there's going to be interest there, because we haven't been able to get the other interest. So that's kind of behind the changes there for the addition and to those two positions of custodians moving into the local.
I also wanted to speak a little bit about how Matt talked about we had an outside agency come in. That outside agency originally said we needed like 6 new employees, but what we did is just by purchasing some equipment that actually allowed them to use, that would actually cut down time. You know, the sweepers for the hallways, new cleaners for the bathrooms, that allows it to be more electronic or automated, I guess, in a way. It cut down time, so it brought us down to needing two individuals. So it wasn't, we didn't just take it at a grain of salt and just say, hey, this is what we needed. We actually did some research and actually, hey, we can purchase this equipment and make it so we only need 2. So that's what we did, and so we're down now to these 2 positions. So I just wanted to highlight that, because it was a lot of, you know, they did a lot of work to try to get to there. And so now we have a 5-year plan for facilities. So if you go to your book for the facilities one.
So that's in the back of your book, one of the last 3 tabs.
Yep. It's called Capital. It's the Capital 5-year plan. So we try to do the same that we do. We don't want to have any roller coaster rides here, so we try to get it so it's pretty stable. I've worked it out with Ronnie, letting her know we want a 3% increase every year, and especially with costs going up. The biggest portion of this cost is actually vehicles, and we have all these different categories that we have items that are requests or needs, you know, whether it be replacing a roof, fixing a roof, or working on electrical. One of the big things is electrical outlets in Pride that we need to put in, because back in the days they only had them on one wall, and that's not really conducive to what we need now. So a lot of these expenses are working through that type of stuff and trying to make it so we're not having these big, huge fluctuations. And so you will see some is more like preventative maintenance, or it will tell you like what type of category they're falling under. So for example, in Carl J. Lamb and exterior walls, it's masonry, you know, the outside of the building, making sure that there's no water coming in. And so you would do that over a time period, and making sure that they're repointed, all the brick and all the joints that are can allow water to come in. So these are some of the things that they're working on trying to make sure. CJL is one of the ones we're really focusing on, mostly because all the other ones have been already renovated. So now we're really focusing on CJL and trying to, you know, paint the interior, and it will take a couple of years, but to, while we have a time period where everything else is fairly new. But if you go to the last page, which is the vehicles, that's one of the ones I consider being the more volatile, that kind of does go up and down. So I listed all the vehicles and trailers that we own on the bottom, and those are the items that we're working to replace, maintain, and make sure that they work. We have 3 plow trucks that are running a lot during the winter, whether it be sanding, salting, plowing, all of our areas, along with our external providers that also do our plowing. So we have to maintain those vehicles and make sure that they're running. We have a boom lift truck that we need to replace next year, but this year we're going to be replacing one of our service trucks. And as you can see down below, what ages are some of them. We have a couple of 2004 trucks, a 2007. They're starting to cost more to maintain, and so it's time to start replacing some of these pieces of equipment. This also includes vehicles that we use for SRTC to move students between job sites and stuff. So there's 3 down there. There's 1 at the special ed unit at Willard Building that also are part of this grouping. So that is in general what is in here. I mean, I can go through each page, but
Obviously, some of that is fluid a little bit in terms of what happens in just emergency situations. But what we've tried to do there is we've made a significant investment in our facilities. We've been very fortunate with the funding that we were able to receive, both through the state funding as well as the local, our own taxpayers stepping up for that. And so it's now on us to make sure that we've got systems set up to be able to maintain those and be able to, as Cheryl said, a lot of that is also making sure that it's not just reactionary, but it's also preventative in terms of what we're doing. And we also recognize that out of all of our facilities, we use one-time funds to help bring Willard back up, to help us for the move of community adult education and the bridge. But Carl J. Lamb is probably the one school that hasn't. And so as you look at a lot of those things broken up into those areas, we've identified Carl J. Lamb School to try to make sure that in many of those areas you may see more painting take place at Carl J. Lamb, for example, and some of the other stuff that we're able to come back to do to help keep our facilities up and top notch.
any questions on Article 9? It's a fairly big article, so I don't know if that's one of the ones we'll want to put on our list for later or not.
I would just say, with the utility costs, I know that the high school, just because I've been walking and the lights turn on or they turn off, so, a lot of them have the timers or the motion sensors. Is the high school the only one that has sort of the motion sensors to kind of help with the electricity when the building is not being used?
No, we have some other ones
And
in
other
some of the
schools?
other areas as well. Yep.
Yep. And one of the big things, for electricity, when we run the field and we put those lights on, it's a very substantial cost when we turn those lights on. So you look at our electricity costs, during the winter it goes down, which is unusual to see, but it's because when we're not using the field during the winter. And once you start using those lights at the field during the winter, that's an additional $10,000 cost. That's substantial. And so that's one of the biggest costs for us, that's kind of seasonal. That's a seasonal cost for us.
And I want to use the time now to sing the praises of Jason Dudley, our Assistant Facilities Director in Maintenance. Jason has been one of the main pieces he's in is really Sanford High School and Sanford Regional Technical Center to really be able to be placed there to help. He's really taken that lighting on because I think we were concerned about how we work that system and are we using it to its maximum capacity in terms of being able to capture savings to be able to do that. And that was an area that before Jason's arrival, I think there were concerns there, but Jason has really done a nice job of helping us learn that system in a way that can help it be able to be operated to kind of cut back on some of those
Yep.
increases in costs if possible.
Yep. He definitely has worked on that a great deal.
And that's another one, as you look at it, remember, we did have a local bond, because as we went through our initial elementary building projects to expand MCS and to renovate Sanford Middle School and move the junior high, we had to value engineer that process. And so that came back to going out to the community for some additional funding for that on the bond. And so we've tried to also utilize that bond and those resources to kind of, you saw what we did with technology to try to leverage those funds to be able to do that. And we're doing the same thing with the local bond as well in terms of those funds to be able to use those. I think Cheryl will get on me and say, hey, we've got some money to spend on here, and I don't like to spend money. And so they laugh. That's okay. I don't take it personally. But I think we want to make sure that we kind of get a handle on everything that we have so we can really be pinpointing those funds to be able to get the impact that we can. So I think as we look at this, that being said, we know the costs of electricity. We've already talked about those utilities are going up that are very high. And then when you start talking about the service contracts that we have to be able to come back to maintain those are costly with that. So we're doing our best in a challenging situation to try to make sure that we're being, in a way, planful, both reactionary, but also being able to try to be proactive that we can. And the safety piece also falls into this article often, too.
Another piece I want to say is we did change our methodology in budgeting for couple of these 5-year plans this year. We actually met with every school or every building and had a discussion around wants, needs. So we have an extensive list behind the scenes of items that are, some of them are wish lists, but some of them are things that are like making sure we put mulch down at the playground earlier in the year and stuff like that, or repainting parking lines in the parking lots to make it safer. And so there's all of this other list that we did this year so that for each building we kind of have an idea of what's out there. And we hadn't done that in a long time, so it was a good exercise to do. And so me, Dawn, Carrie met with every building to have that discussion. So those 5-year plans are taking those discussions into effect of where we put that money.
Yeah, they did a really good job. The guy who doesn't like spending money looked at those lists and said, what? But we'll get there in terms of, and some of that I also is for us to kind of look at, we've got some big items. I know the playground at Carl J. Lamb School is one, and so those are some other areas that you look around that it might have to be other funding sources, Legacy Foundation or something that we might be able to also take those in to try to maximize what we can do with those funding without having it really upset a budget, right? Really to come back into a significant piece on that. Mm-hmm. Anything on Article 9? All right, that will move us into Article 10. And Cheryl, do you want to give us an update on that of why our debt service is going down?
So Article 10, debt service is going down. That's, of course, the interest amount on our debt. This is the portion of the debt that's paid for by the state. So this is kind of the pass-through. A very small portion of this is actually funded by us. But you do have to put forth a budget the same as you do anything else. And so that's going up 0.9 or going down 0.9% or $95,794. So that's the state-funded portion. So we will talk about that again when we do the EPS formula, because you'll see that as part of our funding.
It's a pass-through.
Yes, a pass-through.
primarily-
Majority pass-through.
Primarily, it's a pass-through
Yeah.
with that.
So
just
there's
like-
one bond that we pay 20% of in that grouping. All our other expenses, this is Article 11. This is where we had PAC originally was the only part that was in here, or the Performing Arts Center. But now we're moving the WSSR-TV into this grouping. So it's gone up 106%. But it's really because we've just moved an extra person into this grouping. So salary and benefits have increased by $51,204 due to moving the WSSR position from Article 3 to Article 11. And then there's an additional new equipment that Brett has put forward for $3,226 for a microphone receiver, because we don't have enough microphones. You can't hook enough microphones so that he doesn't have to swap in the middle of a production. So this would make it so he wouldn't have to do that.
So if you've gone to any of our high school productions, wonderful, outstanding job, just amazing that you can see how the people on stage have the microphones. This would be able to, by having this receiver there, to be able to expand that and prevent having to chain them out to be able to do that. And so, as someone who's been blown away by their performances, that was easy for me to keep in the budget.
And so the turn the page is actually really only a 4.5% increase, or $2,433. So now if you can go back to the and go to, so what is our increase? So our total increase of all expense items, all in, is 6.1%, or $3,600,408. So that is our total increase. And so.
On expenses.
On expenses, just expenses. And so, next slide. So how to read your book. So this year is the first year that we have not given this huge book to everybody, because I found that most people really didn't go through it as much, and it was too much, it was overwhelming. This actually, our book that only really us three and one extra is sitting in my office. If you ever want to look at it, feel free. This will all be on the web. We're going to put this all on the website. It will go live on Monday. We didn't want to put it out there until after we had this meeting, because we'll also put everything else we actually included. And anytime we have a meeting and we have handouts or presentations, that will also go on that same website. But for right now, your books are actually only the summary sheets. So what it does is the first part of that book is all the articles. So Article 1 through 11 that we talked about in the executive summary is your top portion of your book. So that's in the summary format, so you don't see what is in each line, but you could go on the website and pull up the detail one to actually look at if you want to see what's in that exact line. But that's where we save a ton of trees. I have anxiety over killing trees, I guess, because I hate printing this big, huge book and find out that most people didn't even use it. So putting it on the web is going to allow it so you can still get to the data that you want to see, but it will also not kill as many trees. The second half of your book is taking your the same budget and putting it in the categories of, I call them the 5100s, the 5200s. So the 5100s are your salaries, your 5200s are your benefits, and then your 53s are your purchase services. So if you look down through, you'll see it says what it is at the top. And so that, if you want to look at something in that category to see what that category went up, you can do that. When we pass your budget, the budget's all passed in article order. So, but I always look at things both in the article and in the, I call it the account numbers, order, because you can see where your anomalies happen sometimes by looking at it two different ways. But the same, each of those groupings total the same amount of money in the end. You also have adult education in there, which we really didn't talk about yet. Adult education is in there for one of the tabs, also in the summary format. The detailed one will be out on the web also. They're actually down 5.6%, and that's due to the change of staffing methodology. That I don't know if Matt wants to discuss that at all right now, or if we'll have that on a different night. You want to do it? Well, we'll have it on a different night. So that one's down slightly. So that is how you read your book. And then, of course, you have your 5-year plans at the end, so if you need those. So on Monday, we will send you out a link to all of the actual details if you wanted to look at them. So you'll see it out there. Similar last year, I actually had it out on the web last year too. So that's what we're trying to do again this year. And so we will go live
What
Monday.
happens in a book here is when you look at it, you'll start talking about the salary and benefits part has to get broken down to salary, but then it also has to go down to retirement, workman's comp, all these different pieces that come back that make it hard to navigate. And so what we've done there is kind of condense all of that to allow you to be able to go through and look at that so that you can be able to see, and then that way there might be information that you're saying, wait a minute, why is this at this point? And then that allows you to probably go back onto what we have in the bigger document, the bigger link, to be able to look at that for it.
And you're always willing to send me a message. I will answer your question too. So, because sometimes it's easier for me to find it for you.
So what we wanted to do today was give you an overview of where we sit on January 21st. We have a budget that has a 6.1% increase on the expense side. We also have coming up this coming week, Wednesday, we'll have that insurance presentation. It's really like an educational component to better understand health insurance. Because that's such a big part of our budget and a big part of the increase that we have now. That will be followed by the budget workshop on Wednesday. We're going to hopefully have our preliminary 279 with our state subsidy. We've got a nice little presentation that will help break that down. Cheryl will do a nice job of helping us understand, and we're going to be able to see where we got our revenue. What we anticipate is we're going to also be able to see where our revenue went down from what we had in the past and why it went down. And then that will be able to, coming out of Wednesday, help us be able to have a better handle on exactly plugging in that state subsidy and where we are, what it's going to be look like for a budget. We then have budget workshops scheduled for the following Monday, which would be January 30th. And then we have the following Monday, which is February 6th. And then we have the following Monday, February 13th. And so I think those are workshops that right now we kind of have those as far as to be determined in what we want to be able to focus on. Tonight, this morning, we've talked about, obviously, I think we want more information for, more information around special education. And then there's also possibly looking at SRTC to get a better understanding of how that might be able to work. But then there may be some other areas that we want to also get more information into and start digging into for that. So I'll open it up to questions or feedback from the school committee and any ideas or recommendations at this time for next steps.
So I guess I'll start. So we don't really have a bottom line. Like if today we were able to vote and give it, say this is what we're saying to go to the city council, is what you're saying here, the 6.1 is where we would land right now, today?
Yes.
Okay,
6.1% or 3.6 million,
okay.
which was on slide 4.
No pressure.
But that increase is, that's not taking into consideration subsidies, and that's not like the increase to the local. That's just the overall increase to the budget.
Expenses, yes. That's just expenses.
But when so I guess I'm not understanding correctly. So I know that this is expenses, but after we get all of the subsidies, grants, everything back in, we're still at 6.1 to go to the city, or we would be less?
We don't know because we haven't gotten our EPS formula
Okay.
subsidy.
And
so-
we're expecting to have that by
on
Wednesday?
Wednesday. So technically, by law, you guys are only vote on the expenses side
Yep.
to bring it forward. So that's where your focus goes. However, we all know that we want to know what our taxation is because that's what the city council is going to be looking at.
Right.
So, yeah, that part we don't know yet because we don't have the funding in yet. So we're waiting sort of patiently.
Yeah. Yeah. Eagerly.
And last year, we brought to the city council, I'm already forgetting, what number did we bring to them? And that got voted on
So what we sent to the city side?
last year?
For
Was it
expense?
4 or was it 3? I can't remember.
Oh, I'm trying to
$1 million
remember.
increase, I think,
I thought it was 4 too,
Yeah.
4%.
something like that.
Let me, trying to remember.
2 years ago, we were the hero. Last year, the city was the hero. Yeah, well, it is a collaboration of working together. I remember years ago, they used to always say it comes out of the same pair of pants. It's just one pocket or the other in terms of that. But yeah, I know last year we were,
Our expenses were up 4.9% at the end last year.
So moving forward in the sense of next year, it really, if the school committee would say, hey, we'd like to do another Saturday-long deep dive workshop, it really would have made more sense for this meeting to be next Saturday, so we could have added on this Wednesday's additional information.
Probably.
Okay.
Last year, we would have had it by now. They're running behind.
They're running behind.
Yep.
Yeah.
but I think we're still going to be okay. As Cheryl
Yeah.
said, our goals focus on expense.
Right.
But at the same time, we do have to make sure that the revenue, and that's why we've kind of laid it out this way, is having an idea of expenses.
Yeah.
Then after Wednesday, we'll have a better idea of where revenue is. I also think that what we want to do at a future workshop, budget workshop, is talk about our plan for the ESSER positions so that you can be able to show this. We're currently in the second year of the third year, and so with that, those funds have been decreasing, and so we've spent a lot of time at the central office level as well as our administrative team level looking at those, because that's going to be challenging, because all of those positions that we have are impactful, are helping us to be able to do that. So we've got an idea of kind of looking at what that plan is. I think also when we look at what we've got over after next Wednesday, we've also utilized opportunities where carryover. I know we've been able to, we have our Monday night, we have our meeting with the audit company, the workshop, and then that will be an agenda item on Monday's school committee meeting. But that will also give you an idea of where we are with carryover. And we've used that in some ways to help us going forward. But I know I've made a conscious decision to hold on to some of that, because that might have to come in handy for us when we talk about the impact and loss of revenue that we have, to be able to help with that. So I think that's also going to be another, at an upcoming workshop, we can talk about the, what we have for carryover. And we've also, over time, right, yes, we're talking about our expenses going up. We talked about fuel going up, for example, but we've also been, over time, create the reserve accounts for us to be able to use that. So I think what we've got to work in front of us is we look at it an expense piece, but then we also want to look at what do we have for ESSER funds, what do we have for carryover, what do we have for reserve accounts, so we can use that in a way that's going to be able to help us be able to support what we want, but also do that in a way, especially with federal funds and ESSER funds going away and that cliff coming for us, how can we be able to do that in a way that's going to also not be impactful or negatively impactful to us?
I guess for me, this was supposed to be kind of like a time saving, sort of all these additional Wednesday and additional meetings. So I think if we were to say for next year, we would change, I would like for us to change things up and almost kind of get what you just talked about all in the day versus kind of like waiting for the next meeting, I guess, is just moving forward for next year. That's just my 2 cents. I don't know. Because I don't know. That's just I mean, we're waiting on information we don't have, so that we're kind of that. But some of this other stuff that you just talked about, we could have had today had we thought it through.
Sure, no, I agree with that, but I also think that this was a good process because we have 2 new members, and it was good to sort of dive into this specific piece of it. And it's a tremendous amount of work, and I thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and I big thank you to Cheryl. Obviously, this has been dominating the Lions' work with that, but our whole team has been able to look at that and work on this, and as well as our administrators putting this together. As I said, there was a lot of thought that went into this with the idea of trying to balance what we have, but also being able to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support our students and our staff and our community.
And I agree, sure, it would be good to have some of that information for next year, having it sooner, but this was such a friendly way of stepping into everything that is the budget, so thank you.
Right, because the subsidy meeting is going to be overwhelming all on its own. That's a lot of information that gets thrown at you in a very short period of time, and it's very, it's a lot. So I would worry about having it all on the same day, because it's a lot. EPS is confusing, and it's very, I'm trying to think of the right word. Complex, very complex.
And one of the things as we looked at this was our goal was to try to be able to take all of this and bring it down. And so we didn't know that's overwhelming in it. So we tried to do it in a way through the executive summaries for us to be able to help you be able to boil all of that down. So I also think that is a learning experience for us in terms of how that went with it. And you look at some of those articles, we were going to whip through those anyways with it. What we had usually done prior to this was we'd take the 11 articles and we would divide them up into our budget workshops. So the first one on Monday would be, we'd do Article 1. That might have to, one of the larger ones, that might have to also go into Wednesday. You know, that's how we'd kind of broken it up this way. Trying to eliminate those meetings allows us to knock it off here, but then leave that up to what do we have to have some decisions on for, or at least more information on, right? Some more information for us to look at. So right now, I think we've got a plan looking at Wednesday for the insurance and the revenue. Do we want to look ahead to the following Monday? Is that something that we might want special education to come in to be able to work on that Monday, the 30th?
I say yes. What about, how do you ladies feel?
I just want to make sure that we've kind of anticipated that, so I want to make sure if I can kind of nail that down to make sure that Stacy's ready for that to come back.
And if we could also have Kathy come in as well at some point also?
Yeah.
To discuss SRTC?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking we hold special ed for that meeting on Monday,
Okay.
and then we can look at, I'll have Kathy lined up on the 6th,
Sounds good.
and maybe adult ed, we can also focus adult ed on that night as well, yeah.
Monday's date, what is that? February 6th. Okay. 30th is what I'm thinking. Thank you.
Yeah, and that will probably be, do you think we can talk about the reserves and ESSER in that? So we're going to plan on Wednesdays with this Wednesday coming up, when we talk about the EPS, we're also going to, at that time, talk about reserve accounts and talk about carryover, and also possibly begin to start talking about ESSER at that time well. And that should also help us to determine from there what other information you may need.
Just a side note, thinking about the weather Monday, not knowing what's going to happen, and we have a school committee meeting on Monday at 6, and then we're meeting earlier, we're not meeting earlier on Monday at 5. So does weather impact our school committee meeting, I guess is what or should we just, I'm comfortable still coming, snow day or not, but I just want to throw that out there.
Yep, my plan on that, we were talking a little bit, is just because if school is canceled on Monday, it does not mean that the school committee meeting is automatically canceled as well. We will, our plan in that would be to hold the meeting, but obviously safety would be the weather conditions and where things are would probably play a piece in that. I think we're going to be okay for Monday evening at 5 o'clock. Like I tell everyone, it's winter in Maine, so you have to drive, with that. Right now, we're looking at the budget to start at 4 o'clock, but I put that with an asterisk. That insurance, we've been working on that presentation for Wednesday, and knowing that there might be some questions, that might be optimistic for us to get that done in an hour. So we may be starting a little bit later than 4 o'clock. Yep, and we're planning to be in here. Yep.
Just curious on Kelly and Melissa, your any thoughts before we end?
I want to commend Cheryl on doing this, because last year when I came and you guys were doing the budget meeting and I saw Jonathan with that big book in front of him, I got intimidated. So this, to me, is a lot better and a lot easier to follow.
The only thing I have to say is the camera doesn't do this book justice, because when I look up there, it does not look nearly as gigantic as it does when I'm sitting here.
Well, it's what, a solid, 3 inches, 4 inches?
8?
5 inches? Yeah, cut it down to an inch, so good job.
Yeah, because the big book has even the departments broken out.
Oh, there you go.
Into, because you can't really look at at the high school on its own, because it actually goes across multiple articles, because you have your administrators and the general staff are in one, and so it gets a little confusing. So we look at it that way at the very beginning when we first start our budget process, but then all of a sudden we have to flip and move it to article, because then once we combine everybody. So that's where it gets a little confusing, but we want to show you that we look at it in 3 different ways, really.
This I can definitely look through.
Yeah.
I do have to say I did try my first year to read that whole thing. All right, is that it?
Recommendation to adjourn?
All in favor? All in favor. Sorry, I skipped the voting voting twice.
Recommendation.
Okay.
There you go.
I'll second it.
All right, all in favor, all in favor. What time?
11:10.
11:10.